My name is Richard Drayton. I was born in a colony in the Caribbean during what we mistakenly call the end of empire, and I'm now Rhodes Professor of Imperial History at King's College London. Imperialism is a regime through which external entities derive maximum gain from the labour and resources within a territory. It is a regime where the local collaborators allow foreign interests to extract maximum rent from local work and consumption. Where neither government nor economy are really disciplined by popular democracy, anti-union laws limit workers' ability to prosecute their interests versus employers, so wages, pensions, and social protections are suppressed. Taxes in business are kept low as possible, so most profits are paid to offshore shareholders, and the costs of reproducing society, childhood and aging, health and education, are paid by taxing the squeezed wages and consumption of labour. Little public support can then go to cultural life, and learning and the arts are the preserve of the wealthy. Imperialism, in its 18th, 19th, or early 20th century forms, constructed a global relationship of centre and periphery, with an opulent and civilized mother country living off its colonies. The tentacles of the City of London for centuries sucked rent out of the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa, which as private and public wealth supported the magnificent extension of urban life and civility and culture in Britain. Around 1948, for example, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company paid less than £7 million to Iran for its oil, but paid £28 million in British corporate taxes and divided another 40 millions among its shareholders, much of which also ended up in the coffers of the Treasury. It is this bounty which made possible great advances in public health, education, and welfare. Imperialism in its late 20th and 21st century forms, however, has no physical metropolis, no real place or human society to which wealth harvested from onshore life is directed. The old imperial powers are now the colonies of a system. Those who know what structural adjustment meant in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America in the 1980s and 1990s, that is to say, a wholesale dismantlement of the power of governments to engineer social and economic development, will recognize what is now being applied to Britain in the name of austerity. It is true that more of the blood sucked from the world economy still trickles down to the citizens of the old imperial powers, but real power and profit is organized in a symbolic space only virtually anchored in London on the one hand, and Monaco, the Cayman Islands, Jersey, or Barbados on the other. A nomadic global pirate class buys onshore services from prostitutes and politicians, journalists, mercenaries and academics, and a cultural space is engineered in which this best of all possible worlds is represented as the only alternative. Academic superstars may even choose to fly the skull and crossbones. This is the environment in which the humanities have in some ways become an endangered species. They're not in danger absolutely, for the wealthy will continue to support the humanities as a form of luxury consumption, a status good, and a source of social power. The already privileged will know that the humanities are at the core of what the medieval university understood as the artis liberalis, the liberal arts, the arts that make men free, those disciplines which teach mastery over language, rhetoric, logic, and sensitivity to music and the structure of nature, and which empower citizens with the capacity to intervene in society and culture. The better off will encourage their children in these paths. Those with independent wealth will also feel more free to take the risky road to an academic career in these disciplines, in which salaries will be low, and where universities will reduce their permanent staff to a minimum, and instead have an increasingly large body of lecturing helots on short-term contracts, who may be hired and fired with the ebb and flow of demand. My own discipline, history, will continue to prosper, for it is valued by the rich and understood by those 18-year-old, perfectly informed consumers of Lord Brown's imagination. But newer and more experimental approaches to the human experience, with small student numbers, will shrink or be cut by Philistine administrators. The ecological diversity of the university will be thinned, and the favoured races which are most likely to prosper in the struggle for survival will be those which are best responsive to that offshore regime of social power. While in theory, the idea of Lehrfreiheit and Lernfreiheit, the academic freedom to teach and to learn, will survive, scholars will come under visible and invisible pressure to work for the pirate class, or at least to perform for their entertainment. And so, those who know the fate of the humanities in the United States may agree, academics can sometimes become a kind of intellectual lap dancer, gyrating to excite the attention of the rich and to provoke small tips. In quiet ways, university hiring and promotion committees can be wary of those who might scare the givers of gifts, and scholars learn to censor themselves and to wear the mask of the geisha. This process was, of course, well underway in Britain, long before the December 2010 education bill. But the new regime of humanities funding, where high fees based on high personal debt replaces public grants based on progressive taxation, dramatically accelerates the slippage away from a democratic idea of the humanities, of the university and learning as the property of all citizens, accessible to all, and entrusted to scholars who are not afraid to read and write and speak as their conscience moves them, and on whatever they find most excites their curiosity. What is remarkable is that most British scholars have made only token opposition to these changes. The British Academy has offered cowardly hand-wringing when it should have led a public campaign of opposition, when it might have invited the Royal Society to join it in defending the liberal idea of the university. Vice-chancellors and many administrators have been active quislings, merely asking how they can best adapt to the new order. What is ultimately at risk are not the humanities, but democracy itself. For the new regime will tend to discourage porous citizens from taking paths which lead to the fullest development of their personality and powers of communication. The pirates and their fellow travellers in business class, on the other hand, will tend to convert their economic power into cultural and political power. A global oligarchy, recruiting some of the most able in each generation to its numbers, will cement its dominance. If the humanities are to serve humanity and not oligarchy, it will not be enough for scholars in Britain to cultivate our discipline gardens. Like our colleagues right now in Wisconsin and Puerto Rico, we will have to join our fellow citizens in political activity, and even in the streets. The democratic challenge of the 21st century is how to force offshore wealth and power back onshore, how to liberate all of us from the empire. In that struggle, every human gift and potential is at stake.